Antibiotic-free, hormone-free beef versus regular grocery store beef. Is there a difference? Hey, what's Shake and Bake? I hope you're doing well. If you wouldn't mind, it doesn't cost you anything. Give this video a thumbs up, maybe even leave a comment. Tell me if you had any experience with this topic in particular. So which type of meat is best for you? Regular grocery store beef, or if you go out and get the best antibiotic-free, hormone-free, grass-fed and finished beef from a local farmer who can sell it to you in bulk, because otherwise you got to pay a ridiculous amount of money for it. What's the way to go? Typically, if you get that stuff at a grocery store, it's going to be more expensive when you're buying it because you're only buying it one steak or one roast at a time. So you're paying a premium. Probably since about 2011 or 2012, I've been buying my beef in bulk. So I'll get a half cow at a time. I get it cut to the way I want, and I get to keep all the fat trimmings, and I get to keep all the other parts of it, like the tail, the tongue, all those things, should I want to. And usually I would give that stuff to my dad, but I'm starting to grow an appreciation for those foods now. So I'm going to start keeping that stuff for myself in the future. But why did I start going down that road to begin with? Well, long before I ever went carnivore, I thought it's going to be so much nicer to have food sitting in a freezer that I can access whenever I want. So I started going to a farmer probably about 20 minutes away, and they had this little natural health grocery store, and they raised their own cows and sold their own beef. They had a local butcher do all the butchering for them. So everything was within like a 5-kilometer radius of their little grocery store. So there was another place that did pork, another place that did dairy and chicken, and all those places would sell their stuff all natural as can possibly be within regulations through their little grocery store on their farm. And it was a pretty neat process because here's the thing. At the time, I was paying $4.50 Canadian for a half a side of beef. If I wanted it finished off with barley versus grain, it would cost like an extra 15 or 20 cents. And then I could go and get it butchered, and then I would pick it up, and a half cow was normally about 90 pounds of ground beef and about 90 pounds of cuts. That's the roasts, that's the steaks, that's everything together, usually about that. Sometimes there's a little more, and it was pretty nice. So I paid this bulk amount, had the food in my freezer, and it was wrapped in butcher's paper. Now, the reason why my ex-wife and I started doing that was she was really sensitive to red meat. Before we got married, she only had red meat maybe once a month because her family believed red meat was the source of all evil. She was almost a vegetarian or vegan. Now, it wasn't something she bragged about. It was just the way they ate. They thought it was healthier. But the problem was, when she started dating me, my dad, he knows how to cook. So when she started going to my dad's place and she had steak for the first time that wasn't cooked like shoe leather at her parents' house, it was amazing. She was like, I never knew it could taste like this. The texture was great. The flavor was great. It was seasoned beautifully and it was cooked perfectly. And she was like, oh man, but here's the problem. She always had gut rot. Whether she was having Italian dishes like with meatballs, or she was having steaks or roast of any kind, it was always something that didn't agree with her, and she would have horrible gut rot afterwards. We found a digestive enzyme, which was just a generic digestive enzyme, would help dramatically so she could have that before her meal, and then she could eat and she'd have no complications afterwards. So we did that for quite a while, and then she tried antibiotic-free, hormone-free beef, and to our surprise, didn't bother her at all. So I was like, okay, well, let's start getting this in bulk. So it was a win-win. We got our meat way cheaper. And if you're a carnivore, I highly recommend buying your beef in bulk. You'll save so much money. Even if you have to go out and buy a deep freezer, which I highly recommend a deep freeze versus an upright for the energy savings you'll have, I highly recommend doing that. You'll save a lot of money in the long run. And the money you're going to spend on that freezer is going to balance out by the end of the year because you'll have saved so much money in meat just because you bought it in bulk. People always have the question, is there a difference between those two? Is one healthier? Well, a nutritional consultant or specialist of any kind might turn around and argue that it has a better nutrient profile or it has healthier fats. All I can tell you is what my experience has been. For the vast majority of people doing carnivore, regular grocery store beef is going to be amazing for you. Personally, I wouldn't spend the extra money on it when you're buying it one steak at a time or one roast at a time. But if you can go to a local farmer and get it cheaper, it just happens to be that those local small-time places treat their animals really well, and they're out to pasture all the time, and they get to have all the grass that they want or hay in the winter. They even give you an option for the feed when you want to fatten it up near the end. And All beef is grass-fed up until a certain point. I believe in Canada, AAA, the best quality meat you can get, is 51% grass-fed. The rest of it is grain of some kind so that it can fatten up the animal. In Canada, you pay for the marbling. That's the highest quality beef you can get, AAA. And AA, there's fat, but it's not always marbled too well. And then the cheapest stuff, that goes for a really cheap cost, and that has virtually no marbling. Now, I was in Europe recently, and Europe, it's quite amazing. In certain parts of Europe, there is no marbling in the meat. No marbling. You look at the steak, it's a beautiful bright red color, and it's not done with artificial dyes. We're talking about local farmers, local butchers going to your local market every week to get food, and there's nothing. There's no white in the meat at all. Maybe you might even find a little bit on the edge, but they cut all the fat off. They've gotten to the point, just like Canada and North America is, where fat is evil and demonized. So keep in mind, this probably isn't an issue for you. If you eat red meat and it doesn't agree with you and you have problems digesting it, maybe for a window of time, you might need some digestive enzymes to teach your body how to digest that meat. Maybe it's something that they add to the meat at the grocery stores because maybe that beef is sort of more mass produced, that they don't worry as much about the quality of the food. Or maybe they use antibiotics in the food. I'm not sure how it's done, but they clearly are doing certain things to affect people who have really sensitive digestive systems. So I wouldn't worry about it if I were you. Just eat meat, but try and find the best price for it. That's all I recommend. Don't worry so much about it being from a grocery store or getting the highest quality beef when you're spending top dollar on it. It's just bragging rights at that point. Bragging rights to me is getting the most amount of good quality beef for the cheapest amount possible. So I've been getting my beef at just over $5 a pound now, but I go to a new place and they vacuum seal every single piece of meat you get. Whether it's a big roast or it's a steak, it's all vacuum sealed. The first place I used to go to for the first number of years just used butcher paper, and you'd get maybe about a year in the freezer before you'd have to worry about, finishing it. But when you get vacuum sealed, you can get a year easily in the freezer and not worry about it. I've had it where it's 2 years old, but because it's vacuum sealed, it lasts a really long time. All the more reason to go get your meat in bulk if you can. You can taste the difference in the flavor. The stuff from the grocery store tastes more watered down. There's just not as much flavor in that meat. I didn't notice a difference between the two until after 6 months of eating my half cow I first ordered the first time. I was like, yeah, I didn't really notice anything. And then one time I went to the local Keg, a steakhouse we have in Canada, and I had a steak, and I used to go there all the time before we got this half cow. And when I had the steak, I took a bite and I was like, there's no flavor in this beef. And I finally saw the difference between the stuff I was getting from a local farmer and the stuff that I was getting from a grocery store. I'm not sure how that breaks down or what that means exactly. All I know is the flavor wasn't nearly as good in the restaurant stuff. And then I sort of started getting spoiled by this good quality stuff. And I always found the best way to cook my steaks. And over time, I eventually got onto sous vide cooking. And that by far, if you ask me, is the best way to cook the most tender, juiciest steak. You take it out and you sear the outside after it's cooked, and ooh la la, it competes with all the top steakhouses I've ever been to. Starting off with a high cut of meat coming from a local farmer, and then cooking it the best way possible to keep the moisture and juiciness in there, and it comes out so tender, it almost always impresses people. And I'm a big believer that if it's something you do every day, I don't care if it's the shoes you wear, the mattress you sleep on, the job you have, whatever it is, you have to enjoy what you're doing all day. If it's the phone you're using, whatever it is, if it's the food you're eating, you want to make sure you enjoy this. You don't want to have to get by on food you tolerate. You want to make it the best quality. That's not always the most expensive, but the best quality for you, what you like. So enjoy this journey you're on. And if you're having trouble with regular grocery store beef, then maybe try upping it. And if you like it, look into buying it in bulk. To me, that's one of the best advantages of getting antibiotic-free, hormone-free, grass-fed and finished beef. Thanks a lot. I appreciate you watching this video. Please give it a thumbs up.